Good evening. My name is Ken Goodpaster. I occupy something called the David and Barbara Coach Chair in Business Ethics here at the Opus College of Business. David and Barbara Coach are enormous and wonderful benefactors of the University of St. Thomas. And there's a book out in the hallway called Lessons in Life and Business that is the story of David and Barbara's life as told to a group of our full-time MBA students who get a chance to poke back at some of the things that he's saying about his life. And you might find that to be an interesting story. And it's available to you for, it's complimentary. And if you are interested in Mr. Coach and his wife, Barbara, I encourage you to take a copy of that book. Also available for your complimentary is Bill George's book, 7 Lessons for Leading in Crisis. That comes to us compliments of the Better Business Bureau of Minnesota and North Dakota. There's still another book out in the hallway called Shiny Objects. That one is not complimentary, but the author of that book is with us this evening and will sign books after our session this evening. I need to thank some people before we get underway, and the two most important people for me to thank are the ones who made all of this happen in the background, and that's Patty Provinsky, if you would stand, Patty, and get some recognition, and Jill Erlin. I think Jill is out front. Are you Jill? Anyway, Jill Erlin. Jill is my administrative assistant. Patty is the research associate for the Coach Chair, and they have done all of the real work behind the scenes here. I want to thank two other people who head up institutes here at St. Thomas that also contributed to sponsoring this event tonight. And one of them is Dean Maines, who's the president of the Veritas Institute. And Dean is up there in the back row, if he would say hello. And next to him is Ron James, who's the president of the Center for Ethical Business Cultures here at St. Thomas. So without their support, we wouldn't be able to do this every year. This is the 19th year that we have done this consecutively here in downtown Minneapolis. The Stakeholder Dialogue was begun 19 years ago as a town and gown experience, a chance for St. Thomas in the middle of the city to allow its students and business persons from around Minneapolis and St. Paul to communicate with one another, to have dialogues about matters having to do with ethics and business culture. So that's how it got started, and it's been a good run, and we appreciate your being here tonight. My job at this point is to turn the podium and the event over to Michelle Rovang Burke. Michelle Rovang Burke is the director. Dean Maines is the president, but Michelle is the director of the Veritas Institute. Prior to joining the Institute, she was the assistant vice president of development for Loudoun Healthcare Foundation in Leesburg, Virginia. She's got more than 15 years of experience in consulting, marketing, public relations, and fundraising for healthcare and educational organizations. She's a former television reporter and a published author, and has served as an adjunct professor. She received the Public Relations Society of America's Silver Anvil Award for Crisis Communication in 1998. She is also a certified compliance and ethics professional. She graduated from the University of Notre Dame with honors, receiving a BA in communications, and she holds an MBC degree from the University of St. Thomas. Rumor has it that Michelle and our featured speaker this evening both watched the Notre Dame versus Baylor NCAA women's college basketball final game. One of them came away happier than the other. I'll now turn the podium over to Michelle Rovang Burke.
Well, he gave you my one secret. The other is that Ken was my boss when I was doing my graduate school work here, so I do whatever he tells me to do, which is why I'm here tonight. Thank you for joining us, and I want to echo a sincere thank you for being here and gratitude for hearing what we have to talk about tonight. As director of the Veritas Institute, our ethics assessment method is modeled after the Malcolm Baldrige Performance Excellence Program. It seeks to translate how well an organization basically walks the moral talk. In essence, that is what our esteemed speaker this evening does. Dr. James Roberts provides for us as consumers the question, are you walking your own moral talk? As Dr. Roberts states, as consumers, we are not who we think we are. It's time to bridge the gap between what we say and what we do. It's time to recommit ourselves to the kind of pursuits that are the true source of our well-being. Spending time with loved ones, reaching our full potential as human beings, and participating actively in our world. Dr. Roberts, as I found out today, actually played basketball while he was here, and I won't bring up Ken's awful story of the game that I watched recently. He graduated here in 1982 and is a native Minnesotan, a well-known author with approximately 75 articles that have been published in the academic literature. He's currently the Ben H. Williams Professor of Marketing at Baylor University. Dr. Roberts' research regularly appears in many of the top marketing and psychology journals. He's received 2 Paper of the Year awards. A primary focus of Dr. Roberts' work over these last 15 years has been the psychology of consumer behavior, often concentrating his research on the dark side of consumerism and marketing. He focuses on the topics of materialism, compulsive buying, credit card abuse, and self-control. This evening, Dr. Roberts will be sharing more insights from his latest book, Shiny Objects, available this evening outside, if you heard earlier. I thoroughly enjoyed his discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed Dr. Roberts' sometimes amusing look at our material possessions. As a new puppy owner, I really loved the first chapter as well. What you'll see is that this material possession love can still bring us to a state of happiness. And Dr. James Roberts will hopefully share some of those tips as well tonight. A nationally recognized expert and media favorite, I'm honored to introduce you to Dr. Jim Roberts' Shiny Objects, Why We Spend Money We Don't Have in Search of Happiness We Can't Buy.
All right, well, good evening. How is everybody tonight? Come on, you can do better than that. How are we all tonight? Good. Well, I'm here. I'm passionate about this subject, and I'm excited to have this opportunity. I want to thank Ken and everybody else here at St. Thomas for inviting their profligate son to come back home. So I was touched by that. Tonight we're going to talk about many subjects that I broach in my book, Shiny Objects, Why We Spend Money We Don't Have in Pursuit of Happiness We Can't Buy. The title of my talk is Can Happiness Be Bought or Sold? And I won't give you the background of that. Those are pictures of my daughter. That looks like happiness in something that might be considered a material possession. But I'll tell you my alternative title before we get started. I really like this one, but we'll just say it's an alternative title. What Would Jesus Drive? The Ethics of Overconsumption. Yeah, I like that one too. Okay. About 2,400, almost 2,500 years ago, Socrates, and this again is the extent of my philosophical grounding and background. About 2,500 years ago, Socrates said that an unexamined life is a life not worth living. He also had a couple other things to say. He said happiness was the goal of all of our activities. Ultimately, everything we do was in the pursuit of happiness. Therefore, happiness is what he called an unconditional good. It was good because all of our activities and behaviors were focused on achieving happiness. Also, fairly heretical for the day, he also argued that humanity can be obtained through happiness can be obtained through human effort. So that was really different for the day. And lastly, he said that happiness does not depend upon external things, but how they're used. So when we're talking about tonight about material possessions and money, it's not that they're necessarily evil. They only can bring happiness. Their happiness will come dependent upon how they're used. And so we all know, and we're going to talk about how material possessions and money can be used in such a way that they can engender some kind of happiness. All right, I would like to ask you a question. I'd like to ask you a question, and we'll hold off on answering this question. I think you may have a little different response after we finish tonight. But what do you think about this question? Can happiness be purchased online, at the mall, or from a catalog? All right, that's a good question. A lot of us have tried, despite the hard facts that say that we have or we can accomplish happiness. As Americans, we have tried our best to achieve happiness through purchases. And what I wanted to share with you tonight is just a couple short stories. And my favorite part of the book is a vignette in every chapter called Consumers Gone Wild, about our behavior as consumers. And I think all of you will see a little bit of you in a lot of these examples that I'll share tonight. And I definitely am not picking on pet owners. I love animals as much as the next guy. Pet spending in the United States. Anyone want to guess how much money we spend on our pets? 2011, we spent $52 billion on our pets. I always say, for my students, including me, for us mathematically challenged people, $1 billion is 1,000 million. That's $58,000 million we spend on our pets. And it's not just for the spayed and neutering and the broken leg. We have psychoanalysis for our pets. We have all kind of prosthetic nudicles for neutered and spayed pets and things like that. So we really went out. Matter of fact, I was watching the Cooper show, what's that guy's name again? This one, Anderson Cooper. They're talking about extreme pet owners. And so we go a long way to make sure our pets are happy, to the tune of about $52 billion a year. Last Halloween, and you'll see why I bring up last Halloween, I could talk about all the money we just spent on Easter or all the money we just spent on Valentine's Day. And I will give you one note, that on Valentine's Day, men outspent women 2 to 1. And of course, I commented in my blog, it's because we had more to make up for. But so, anyways, as it comes to Halloween spending, it's down there on the list. It's about the 8th largest, the most we spend on any holiday. It's about the 8th largest. We spent $30 billion on Halloween last year. Parties, candy, all that kind of good stuff. But here's the pets. Of that $30 billion, we spent $310 million on pet costumes. Did I have $310 million on pet costumes? Okay. Now I'm really treading. I know with pets and things like that, I'm treading on thin ice here. And certainly when I start talking about people's grandmothers, I'm really in trouble here. But a grandmother in Colorado, the founding member, let me see if I can get this right, of the National Cookie Cutters Collectors Club. National Cookie Cutters Collector Club. I'm an advertising professor, so I'd shine that up to NC4, kind of update their image. She is the proud owner of 10,000 cookie cutters. So many cookie cutters, she doesn't have room to bake the cookies that they were made for. All right. And last, junk in your trunk. And I have to give credit where credit's due. This is one, my daughter came up with that title for a blog that I had written about the storage unit business. I get asked often, well, where does all this stuff go that we're buying? And I think you all know the answer to that. Under our beds, in our garage, in our attic, or for many of us in the storage units that we now own. To give you a little bit of an idea on why this would have been such a great investment back in the early 1980s, 1984, there were 6,400 storage units. By 2010, there were 46,500 storage units. To give you an idea how much space that is, every man, woman, and child in the United States could fit under the canopy of storage unit business. So we love our stuff, and we found a place now to put it. All right, well, the question that I have, and this is really at the very core of why I wrote this book, was, has all this spending made us happier? When I put these two graphs together, I said there's something here. We need to really take a careful look at our spending, and is our spending achieving what Socrates told us is our end goal of all of our activities, is to be happy. Well, let's just look. This is based upon an annual survey, that General Social Survey out of the University of Chicago, and this is based upon over 50,000 people since 1970 to now 2011. And what we found is on the top graph, gross domestic product, I'm not an economist, but is largely made up of personal spending. So what we've seen is personal spending has been increasing, and little bit of dips there. Those are the recessions that we have, about a couple of them every year. So in that big dip is the Great Recession of 2008. We all experienced that. So yeah, but pretty much unabated, we're spending more and more and more. Now the question becomes, has that made us any happier? And we look at the bottom graph for the answer to that question. Our happiness has flatlined. Over the same time period, we're no happier today than we were 40-some years ago, despite an ever-increasing amount of material possessions. So something's going on. There's what I call the materialism-happiness disconnect. All right, St. Augustine had this to say about money, buying money, and I like the mental imagery. Think about this as I read back to you St. Augustine's thoughts on buying happiness. My soul was sick and covered in sores, and it rubbed up against material things in a desperate attempt to relieve the itching. But since material things have no soul, they can't be loved. Well, that was a real powerful statement. But the good book, the Bible, isn't also silent on money and happiness. And here's just a couple selections from the good book, the Bible. 1 Timothy 6:10 said that it's what? Money, but it's not money, but the love of money that's at the root of all kinds of evil, right? A very important distinction, because the first reaction that I'll get from a lot of people here, wait a second, can't money buy us a measure of financial security and safety? And yes, it can. But it's the love of money really what we're talking about tonight. It's the love of money, the amount, how much importance and where we place material possessions in our life is really what we're talking about, less so money and more about material possession. Matthew 6:19-21 said, do not store up your treasures here on earth where they'll rot and rust and be stolen. And then Matthew 6:24 was, man can't serve both God and mammon. So the Bible seems pretty clear on what it thinks about money. But we won't even go into the subject that I really enjoy talking about as well, as the prosperity gospel, and the idea that God blesses us with financial blessings dependent upon our faithful living. But we won't talk about that tonight. So there are people who disagree and argue that the Bible does have something else to say about money and happiness, but this is to me some of the most powerful testimony of the Bible, talking about what we can hope for with money and possessions. So why is it so bad? What's so bad about living a materialistic lifestyle? And this is really the reason why I wrote the book. I think we can all understand that when we place material possessions at the forefront of our life, it leads to financial woes, but credit card debt, arguments with our wives and things like that. But I think the real kind of pernicious aspect of materialism is the fact that it impacts what really makes us happy, is that it impacts how we feel about ourselves. It impacts the quality of relationships we have with other people, and very importantly, one of the reasons why I'm here today, it impacts our willingness to get involved in the community and get involved in tithe at church. So a lot of real negative outcomes from materialism that we wouldn't think about on first blush. And first blush is, I spent too much money, I got too much credit card debt, I work too long to make the money I do, and it could be spending time with my wife and my kids or working in the community. So I think we need to think about the full aspect, the full ramifications of our love of material, our material possession love, if you will. We got the financial woes, and certainly the environmental woes, and we can't look for them. My doctoral dissertation was on environmentally and ecologically and socially conscious consumer behavior, and e-waste, pollutions, and landfill. We forget about the what do we do and how do we get rid of the products that we're so in love with. All right, so I've been asked today, my charge today was to talk about the ethics of overconsumption, both from an individual and from a corporate perspective. And I'm supposed to wrap that all up in 40 minutes, so I better get started. Why should we take time out of our busy lives? And that's one of the reasons we'll get to later. But why should we take time out of our busy lives to look at our morals and talk about or examine our morals? A number of compelling reasons. One is that they guide our lives in pursuit of noble versus self-serving endeavors. They can inspire us to live lives of meaning. They can be a failure to live up to our morals can be a catalyst for change, and also they can help living by a life of morality can lead to higher self-esteem. Richard Wilk, an ethicist, had this to say about consumption and morals. They can't be separated. He said, consumption is in essence a moral matter, since it always and inevitably raises issues of fairness, self versus group interest, and immediate versus delayed gratification, and that's where that self-control comes in. All of our behavior as consumers impacts other people. We call this negative externality. No matter the smallest behavior involves other people not involved in that exchange. And what I mean by that, let's take a couple examples. Let's look at cigarettes. When I want to buy or I want to smoke cigarettes and originally marketers were happy with someone makes something and I want to buy it, that should be sufficient, right? That's called the marketing concept, the idea that they want to sell it, I'm willing to pay what they're asking for cigarettes, then who else should be involved in that particular decision? Well, we all know who else should be involved in that. What are some of the negative externalities of smoking cigarettes? Secondhand smoke. Yeah, health and loss of loved ones. What about, we all pay higher insurance premiums. Yeah, there you go. So what I'm saying here is we can't separate our behavior as consumers from our behavior from our morals. So that's cigarettes. What about alcohol? We certainly well understand the negative externality. The fact that people not involved directly in that exchange are directly or significantly impacted by that exchange. Drunk driving, right, and loss of family members and things like that. And now, I left cell phones to the end. Do cell phones have negative externalities? And I love to talk about cell phones because I know how invested many of us are, particularly students, and right, I'm talking a lot to students. Well, yeah. Anybody? What's a negative externality of something as innocent as a cell phone? Yeah, there could be some real qualitative ones, as well as I was going to stick with one of the meatier ones. What about distracted driving? What about, to me personally, the fact that one person would die from someone else exercising their right to talk on a cell phone where they're driving is one too many people. And so, so cell phones even have negative externality. And I haven't even touched on the fact, one of my favorite facts in the book, is that we discard between 130 and 140 million cell phones every year. So don't even get me started about the recycling program. We'll talk about that in a second, but recycling would have to be in quotations when we talk about cell phones. All right, so our behavior as consumers clearly impacts the environment. I love this camper's backcountry ethic. Leave a campsite as you found it. Well, my mother and grandmother improved on that. She said, when you leave a room neater than when you entered it, right? So that's one step even better. So how is our behavior as consumers impacting the environment? Well, there's a real simple little formula. Environmental impact is made up of population, which we're not doing too bad. We're kind of a middle-and-run country. We have 300 million people, nothing compared to China and India. But so we've got that going for us. And technology, we're pretty efficient in how we make things and use things pretty efficiently. But here's the real bugaboo, our affluence. We consume a lot. To give you an idea, we consume on average 4 times the amount of energy of the average country. So we're what I call uber consumers, and you can see us up there. We spend a lot, and we consume a lot of energy. So our behavior as consumers emanates from our life goals. And we have 2 basic kind of categories of life goals, extrinsic and intrinsic. Extrinsic life goals would be things like financial success, social recognition, physical attractiveness even. These goals undermine our well-being because they're contingent upon other people's approval, right? For us to, status, that someone else has to confer that status upon us, right? The money someone has to say, wow, you're really wealthy or well-to-do. And so they're contingent upon other people's approval, and that's never a way to base, to generate a strong foundation, a stable foundation of self-esteem. But intrinsic goals for how you feel about yourself, your relationships, and your community involvement are inherently satisfying. When we're involved in the community, have healthy relationships, and feel good about who we are, we're happy as people. And the problem is that materialism runs counter to those intrinsic goals. Materialism is everything about what? Financial success, social recognition, physical attractiveness. Well, you're trying to look attractive, but so I'll throw that one in there. But so it runs counter to the very things because it's a comparative and competitive process. Think about a materialist. He's one who wants what? He wants to have more than other people. He wants other people to recognize him or her as a person of value. So it's a competitive and comparative process, and there's always going to be someone with more. My favorite story was I was being interviewed someplace, and we were talking about, well, how does that, what do you mean? And then it's talking about, well, a lot of us have been blessed to be, financially fairly well off, and we've got a 2,500 or a 3,500 or maybe even a 4,000 square foot. And we were talking about that, and I said, do you know how big Shaquille O'Neal's house is? 72,000 square feet. So the point I'm making is there's always going to be someone with more. We're always going to be left in second place. And so it just doesn't help us foster good and positive feelings about ourselves. So our life goals are very important. And right now we are living in a consumer culture. We are the uber consumers, right? We have led the vanguard of consumption for the last 40 or 50 years. And what's most disturbing, what should be most concerning to us, is that we've got the rest of the world jumping on the bandwagon, right? We've got China with 1.2 billion. Forgive me if I'm off by 100 million or so there, but 1.2 billion in India. And so what does that mean? When they start to ramp up their consumption to anywhere near the levels that we're seeing here in the United States, we're in for a real treat, right? Treat in quotations. Look at this. Look at the life goals, the changing life goals of students. This is done on a UCLA freshman survey of about 40,000 students entering freshmen every year. And I just picked out two of the some 20-some goals that they talk about. And look at this. The goal of being very well off financially from early mid-1960s to 2010 has grown exponentially up now there around, 75-80%? What's happened to the contrasting goal of developing a meaningful philosophy of life? It's kind of suffered increased attention towards the material possessions. And so we're really changing, and this change to a consumer culture. I was talking to Dr. Goodpasture this morning. I was talking about a lot of my research, and again, when you start reading, it's like a laundry list of the dark side of consumer behavior. Materialism, compulsive buying, credit card abuse. Oh, he's a fun guy to be around at a party. And what I found, though, what's particularly disturbing is that, and I predicted this long time ago in my research on compulsive buying, is that we're seeing an increase in compulsive buying with each successive generation. And what we found that's really disconcerting is that we're not only seeing an increase in compulsive buying, but we've seen men jump into the fray. So when I started doing work on compulsive buying 15 years ago, it was erroneously thought, and maybe it had just changed enough that it wasn't a mistake, but it was thought to be solely a female affliction. It was that was what women did, right? How they've associated females with being the shoppers, but that's not the case anymore. Now we've seen in careful national surveys that as many men can be deemed clinically as compulsive shoppers as women, and I'm seeing an even increase to where it used to be projections of 2 to 5%. With some of the millennials, Generation Y, X, where I'm finding incidents as high as 15%. And that's millions and millions of people who suffer from clinical compulsive shopping, which is way out there on the end. Most of us probably will never attain that status, but all of us fall somewhere in that range of compulsive buying. So things are really changing, and we need to be sensitive to that. All right, I like to keep things simple. And we're talking about, how our behavior affects other people. I think of the golden rule, the golden rule of do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Well, has had play in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, and even in the writings of Muhammad. So this golden rule of, do unto others you'd have them do unto you is an easy way to kind of judge your behavior. And a lot of you probably use that. But here's what I call the golden rule acid test. I'd like you to think and answer this one to yourself as we're talking today, and I'll tell you a little bit about some results of research that did this. Is it morally just and fair to be free to have plenty to eat, nice clothes, luxuries, time, and money for fun, TV, and comforts, while others in the world are starving, uneducated, and in poor health? That's a tough one. That's a tough one. And so now that I've got you hooked on that one and talking about that, I'm going to shift gears. Now I'd like to shift gears and talk about why why do those dirty little marketers get us to buy all this stuff that we don't need? So that's at the real crux here. Can we just point, and again, remember, I'm an advertising professor, I'm a marketing professor, so it's always funny to hear this kind of talk coming from someone who preaches the gospel in so many ways. So the $64,000 question really becomes, does marketing create or meet needs? And I think there's a real good argument to be made that, unlike a lot of people who just want to point their fingers and see if we can just get those people to stop calling me at home, or if we could just not have everything branded in calls and billboards and all that, we'd be better. But what about this? In marketing, again, I talk both sides to my students and people, but we have something called the marketing concept that I alluded to earlier, and that is really at the very core of marketing. We teach our students that to be successful, a product has to meet a real need. So it's identify a need and meet that need. That is the marketing concept. And we argue that it's too expensive to create needs. We have a marketing research tool in place that it's easier to identify real needs and satisfy those needs than try to come up with needs that people don't have. Also, people argue that advertising is crass. It's tasteless. And has anyone ever thought maybe that just simply reflects a crass and somewhat tasteless society? So maybe it's more of a reflection of society than anything else. And then what about Moses and Lakshmi? I love that name, Lakshmi. Well, we know Moses, right? And the golden calf and the 10 Commandments. Lakshmi is the Hindu goddess of wealth and prosperity. The Hindus pray to her to bless them financially. And why do I bring these two up? Just to make a point that long before there was really any kind of advertising to speak of, we were already in love with shiny objects. Now, on the other side, there are others who argue that marketing, and I think that would probably be the majority, there's others who argue that marketing creates needs, that it makes us buy stuff that we don't need. And I think a lot of times when we look at our own behavior, there seems to be some empirical evidence to that, and then in that direction. But let's look at that for a second. But a lot of research, we can get our marketing message, we hear about, on average, depends on whose research you believe, about 3,000 to 3,500 marketing messages a day. And we get a lot of it from TV. We are in love. I've worked for Time Warner for years, doing focus groups about why people watch cable TV, what they can do to steal customers from their competition and things like that. So I've had a good education in TV watching and how that impacts us as consumers and really more importantly as human beings. Anybody? How much TV do we watch on an average person watch in a typical day? About 5 hours. 5 hours. That is one seriously dedicated pursuit. 5 hours. I've had focus groups where people describe their day for me. They'd get up, they'd go to work, they'd come home, they'd eat their meal in front of the TV, they'd watch TV till they fell asleep. Often they'd wake up at 2 in the morning, watch TV till they fell back asleep, and do it all over the next day. So we are dedicated. TV is a media imperative, as we like to call it, in marketing. And so what's so bad about that? Well, what's bad about that is we know that children who watch TV, a little bit more of an unguarded consumer, but children who watch TV are more materialistic, and as we all know as parents, they make more product requests the more TV they watch. But that's not too far from how we as adults react to watching a lot of TV as well. There's something called gap theory, and I love this. And it's not just the advertising, though. What we found is, everyone says, oh yeah, it's the advertising. But it's actually the stories and the people who have wonderful cars, are beautiful, work as neurosurgeons and they're only 21. Right? That just makes the rest of us disappointed. And the gap theory says this. It says people who watch a lot of TV have a larger gap, that's why they call it gap theory, between their current state and their ideal state than people who watch less TV. A little bit because of the commercials, but a lot of it about the kind of content of the shows themselves. So yeah, there's some evidence that we watch more TV, we buy more stuff, or we want more stuff is really more important. And then what about, I always bring this up to my students, but this crowd will be more receptive. What about, how do we explain the existence of products like Chia Pets? I mean, come on. We must be buying stuff we don't need when we bring out the Chia Pet, right? That's kind of my closer. I always come in with that one. But see, it's lost on my students. I see some college students up here. Because they don't know, any college student know what a Chia Pet is? The pet you put the dirt in, okay, good. So they're just like the students I talked to at Baylor. So, come on, there's got to be something going on there. Well, I should have made this a little bit bigger. Anyone, can they see and tell me what this is? Remember from Psychology 101? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Well, we are both fortunate enough that many of us have met our lower level needs for food, shelter, and clothing, right? We've got that, and so we've moved on to the next. And so these higher level needs that Maslow identified are no less real once those earlier level needs have been met. And so when you talk about something like the Chia Pet rocks, Snuggies, cell phones, let me ask you a question. What possible need, remember, I always go back to my students, remember I told you that if the product doesn't meet a real need, the marketing concept, it won't be successful. Then we come up with a product like the Chia Pet, and that seems to undermine my beautiful marketing concept theory. Anybody? Why do we buy? What need could possibly be addressed or met by something like the Chia Pet? Yeah, most of us got too much, or have enough to eat. I would say too much to eat, and we have a nice place to live and enough clothing and things like that. So we moved on to those needs for social acceptance and for self-esteem. And so even though it's a stretch, we find that we get that. It's something that everyone else does. We have something to talk about, and we're part of the in crowd. And I even sometimes get more cynical, and I say, well, the Chia Pet, when we've got it's holidays, they always come out around Christmas. What? We need a cheap present for someone we don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about or care about. We buy the Chia Pet, right? So we just have to work a little bit harder. We have to work. General Motors doesn't make Chia Pets, doesn't it? But so we have to work a little harder, but that's just kind of where we've come to. Cell phones, so there's a lot going on. It's, are we creating these needs? And gross domestic product is on the rise. Personal spending, and so we've seen as advertising and the marketing machine, gets to its full speed, moving up to its full speed, we've also seen our spending going. But you got to be careful about correlation and causation. Is there a cause there, or what's driving the bus there? Is it materialism driving spending, or is it the advertising driving the spending? Gross domestic product is on the rise. We spent last year alone, you kind of come back to that question, can happiness be bought online at the mall or from a catalog? We spent, Madison Avenue, $132 billion last year to try to convince us that happiness can be purchased. All right, in chapter 11 of my book, I talk about why do we keep coming back? Just because I had a good friend, a psychiatrist friend, who I think it's on the liner of my book, said, how can we ever get enough of something we don't need? I thought that was pretty profound. And so we can never fill up. It's something we call, in marketing, the treadmill of consumption. This is my claim to fame. I was quoted in Reader's Digest about the treadmill of consumption. So I was going to share that with you. I got more attention for that than I did anything else I did. And the idea, and what I said, and there's someplace, in an interview, said that when we buy more and more, we never get any closer to happiness. We only speed up the treadmill. And there you go. And I got a few minutes, so I'll talk about that. It's because of something called adaptation theory. And the treadmill is based upon this idea that as human beings, we have been gifted wonderfully with the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. That's why we've been around as long as we have. And so that's both good and bad. The good is when we have a loss, a family member loss, or we lose loss of some faculty that we have, we very quickly adapt to that loss, and we can live very happy lives. Well, that's the good of this ability as human beings we have to adapt. The bad is when it comes to spending money in material possessions. That same ability to adapt works against our best interest when we're talking about money and material possessions. And just a simple example, a college student, right? God, just get me out of the dorms, right? Just get me into an apartment and no roommates and I'll be happy. Then pretty soon I need an extra bedroom in my apartment, right? So I can have an office. And then pretty soon as my neighbors are making so much of a mess, I need my own house. And every time we make that step up, we just speed up the treadmill, we raise our baseline of comparison, so we keep consuming, but we're not getting any closer to happiness. All right, so in chapter 11 of my book, I talk about, there's a lot of reasons why we spend. Again, if you're just kind of speeding up that treadmill, but I also don't want to let marketers completely off the hook here. And so I talk about something called weapons of mass consumption. Talk about things that marketers, and it's not marketers really. I mean, I shouldn't be pointing the finger at marketers, but there's things that business does to keep us coming back to the cash register. Here's a couple of my favorite. One is called planned obsolescence. We can all relate to this, right? Design for the dump, death dates, that products are designed, and we all know that, to fail. We can tell you, iPod or Apple can tell you how long a battery an iPod will last, and then try to replace that battery. Oh, well, by the time that says, you don't want that iPod anyways. It's the last generation, right? It kind of gets back into the next point I'm going to make, perceived obsolescence. So products are designed to fail. Started really in earnest in the 1940s and 50s, and so we all had those experiences where we want to fail. We sell, I'm going to be wrong with the exact number, so don't hold me to it, something like 100 million televisions. No, it couldn't be that many. 32 million televisions a year. Guess how many we have repaired? 20,000. So, it's too expensive, or it's too outdated. We need flat screen. We need 46 inches, and so there's just no compelling reason. So we go back to the cash register and buy. And the same thing, but different, with perceived obsolescence. General Motors really got the ball rolling in the 1920s with the annual style, when they introduced the annual style change. Up until then, it was kind of the Henry Ford idea of you can have any color you want, even though he didn't really say that, as long as it's black. Well, General Motors sensed that people wanted a little more variety. They wanted to be able to individualize their cars, and so they introduced the annual style change. And the history behind that was Henry Ford believed in what he believed in. He refused to change the style every year until he fell so far behind in market share he never caught up, and ultimately he introduced the style change. So, perceived obsolescence. What about technology? What about the iPods, the iPads, the cell phone? I mean, we know, as consumers, we're very acute. Acute observers, we know that that's the old version. In some way, you're less of a person because you've got an old iPad, or heck, I have a phone that doesn't even have access to the internet. How important can I be? So, perceived obsolescence. Women's clothing. Short skirts, high heels, low heels. I've got 2 daughters and, of course, a wife. And so, yeah, I well understand the importance of perceived obsolescence. It's out of style. Or even products are produced that, this is kind of more like planned obsolescence, where they have such faultless lines that even the smallest scratch on our car does what? We need to get rid of it, right? It doesn't look. That's by design. All right, and one of my favorite subjects is product placements. And we all know what those are, right? Companies now often make more, or the media makes more money off of product placements than they do the advertising on the television shows. And so we place products because of the clutter, right? There's so many other things competing for our attention. Now, if not other commercials, we're talking on our phone, we're doing all the different things that we do when we tend to media, that we have to find a way to get your undivided attention. And we do that by slipping products in your movies, in your television shows, and even in your books that you're reading. Now, we've even co-opted, books. And, there'll be brand names mentioned in books. And when you see that, unless it's just an out-and-out mistake, that was done and was paid for dearly by the marketers, by the media people. One of my favorite, movies, we saw it twice. Again, I do have teenage daughters, was Paul Blart, Mall Cop. How many people would admit? Did they see it? I shouldn't have admitted. I should have just said. I did a chapter in my book, chapter 11 talks about this. There were 49 product placements in Paul Blart Mall Cop. And again, it was perfect because it was in a mall, so it had all these storefronts. None of them were there by accident. They were all paid for. Favorite television show? I say that now with quotation. American Idol. I won't ask how many people watch American Idol. They make more money off product placements than they do advertising. I mean, Ryan Seacrest will talk about, get on your Verizon phone and call in for your favorite. I might be talking about the wrong guy, wrong phone. Verizon, Coke, Ford, they make more money off product placements than they do advertising. And again, how about Tom Hanks and Castaway? What were the products placed there? FedEx just was everywhere, and Wilson, Wilson volleyballs and things like that. So yeah, it's a way for companies, marketers, to get your undivided attention. We're doing research to see how effective that is, but it's almost like subliminal advertising that it's almost hitting you at a subconscious level. And so we've determined that might be a good way, and we've just infected Great Britain, who now, I think in the last year, has allowed their first product placement, like a toaster on the set of some news show. So the idea is we are really the biggest export we have is our consumer culture. And lastly, and I think this is a particularly disturbing trend from an ethical standpoint, is our word of mouth, organized or strategic word of mouth campaigns. We call it breaking, I call it smashing down the fourth wall. The fourth wall is that wall between actors and the audience in the theater. Well, we're doing that same thing with marketing and with marketing a product. And what we do is, and companies as reputable as Procter & Gamble have hired contingents or legions, armies, if you will, of mothers and young girls, mostly some boys, to go out there and are paid, with some, usually not a lot, but to spread the word about the products that they're promoting. And so the next time you're in a bar or restaurant, even at work, that person who's singing the praises of that new cell phone or lipstick or whatever it might be, very well might be a paid product endorser. Online, it's rampant. Anything you hear about some glowing review, it's very likely that that's a member of an orchestrated word-of-mouth effort. So they've even co-opted our personal relationships to sell us products. All right, so in closing, if I can find my glasses, in closing, consumption is a moral matter. How we spend our money is not entirely our own business, and as individuals, we can make a difference. So how can we do that? How can we make a difference? How can we change the world beginning with ourselves? A couple of ideas I had, and just play through these and think through these. The real idea behind this book was to get people thinking about this. We're so far down the road of the consumer culture. This is not, as you can see, is not something that people run out of the audience after I've talked and give up their material possessions and move into a kibbutz. It just doesn't happen. But we need to start the dialogue, and we need to look at the ramifications our behavior as consumers have on other people. Try to distinguish between needs and wants. Really think about that hard for a second, or closely for a second. Beyond the very basic needs for food, shelter, and clothing, which most of us are well beyond, everything we buy is a discretionary purchase. Everything we buy is a discretionary purchase. The 3 R's of living a simple consumer lifestyle: reduce, reuse, or recycle. I'd suggest reduce or reuse. Why? Because when we recycle, we continue to spend. We just feel a little bit better about it, right? And trust me, that wasn't lost on the cell phone industry, right? When they're starting to get a little guff about all the cell phones we threw away, they started coming up with these recycling programs. And again, I don't want to end my talk on a downer, but you know what happens to recycled cell phones? They're shipped off to China and India, where they pile up on roads that are higher than the cars that go by. They leach chemicals into the ground, and they pay people 25 cents an hour to pick out the little things that might be recyclable, and the rest sits there and rots. So that's the truth behind the recycling program. And remember, when you recycle, you continue to purchase. So I would suggest reduce or reuse. Clarify your life goals. I call this the deathbed test. I don't think anybody on their deathbed would have wished they spent more time at work or would have amassed more material possessions, right? We would have wished that we had spent more time with our children, that we'd have bettered ourselves, that would have been more involved in church and the community. I do what seems like and I talked about it a little bit in the book, seems like a fairly morbid activity. I have my students write their own obituaries. I do this every semester because I do have to get evaluated, and so I try to do it just often enough. And it's an eye-opening experience. Think about how do you want to be remembered. And again, just like the deathbed test, it's rarely about how many material possessions you've amassed, how much money you're worth, and all the social recognition you may have gained. Save your money. That sounds easier. That's just like marketing. On the first day of every semester, I talk about what we're going to talk about this semester is easy to learn, but hard to do. Marketing is, nothing we're going to talk about is that difficult to understand. But it's very difficult doing it. It's the same thing with our behavior, our self-control, is that it's easy to understand. Well, we should spend less than we make, right? That we need to control our spending. Easy to learn, but very difficult to do. But I can tell you how free you feel when you finally get control over your spending. It's a peace that you can't really experience anywhere else. My favorite quote, I come from someone from hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. He said, "Indeed, I am a king because I rule myself." So no small matter. Shop responsibly. There are guides out there about how to spend with companies that have responsible, you give to charity and have responsible and green manufacturing process. Investing responsibly, avoiding sin stocks, practicing the lost art of self-control. It is a lost art, and it's very free, and you think denying yourself, that means no fun. It opens you up to experiences that you just can't have when your house isn't in order. So be a voice for change. It's a little bit like, the message that I'm sharing with you today is a little bit like a salmon swimming upstream, right? It's not something that people really want to hear a lot. I'm either preaching to the choir, right? I know a lot of you would say, this is what I've heard, and this is, what I believe. The rest of us, we got to keep pounding it. It's got to work. And so be a voice for change. And let me close with a quote by someone, no other than Einstein, who said, and I thought this was very profound, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. Thank you very much for being such a good audience.
Wow, some great comments, and we will have more discussion ahead. Now I would like to introduce you to another academic voice from our own St. Thomas. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Lisa Abendroth, Associate Professor of Marketing here at the Opus College of Business. Dr. Abendroth received her bachelor's in sociology from the University of Pennsylvania. She also received an economics degree there at the Penns Wharton School. Her PhD is in marketing from Duke University. Dr. Abendroth focuses much of her research on consumer purchase and repurchase decisions, as well as consumer satisfaction and regret. Not that any of us would have that. With several major works and academic publications around consumer decision-making, she has been recognized recently for work regarding consumer decisions and the ethics of word-of-mouth marketing. Dr. Abendroth also has received many awards, including the Broderick Award for Service to the Graduate Program, School of Management at Boston University. A respected researcher and definitely a student favorite, please join me in welcoming Dr. Lisa Abendroth as she provides an academic perspective.
Thank you so much. I'm used to walking around and having slides, and tonight I'm kind of stuck behind a podium, so I'll do my best not to walk around and jump off the walls like I do in my class. When I was asked to do this presentation, one of my first thoughts was, I'm sure what Jim didn't want me to think was, I should go buy a new suit for the occasion. This is not a new suit, this is a very old suit, but it was, we do have those things about these times and reasons for materialism. I kept reading the book. I'm not good at reading in large chunks, so I kept reading chapters at a time. Jim's book does a great job of describing how our society got to this point. I've never been a lover of history, but as I read through those chapters of the history and the role of religion in shaping some of these things and the Protestant work ethic and then getting into the mortgages and the availability of credit, so many things, these things to describe, and studies as well, the relationship between materialism and happiness and some of those issues. The last few chapters of his book begins to provide suggestions for how to break some of these consumption cycles, how to improve our own decision making. And I say begins because it's taken us decades to get to this point, and it's going to take a while to get out of this point. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about ways to be happier as consumers, and really that's kind of the first spot. It's easiest to start with ourselves, and then later we need to also think about how do we improve as a society. As Michelle mentioned, much of my early research focused on consumer regret and satisfaction, which are really close cousins to things like happiness. I'm going to start with a question from one of my favorite research studies. Who is happier? The Olympic bronze medalist or the Olympic silver medalist? The bronze medalist. Why? They're grateful to be on the podium. Their most salient alternative is I could be in the locker room right now. Okay? The silver medalist is going, I could have been the gold. And it doesn't have to do with expectations. And the studies looking at this, that they've either met or exceeded their best performance or their expectations. So it's not like they have failed personally. It's that the comparisons we make, I compare upward and I feel worse about myself, or the bronze medalist, I feel better about myself because I'm making these downward comparisons. Some of my early research when I was a doctoral student at Duke was with a guy named Bob Ashew, who's now at Stanford. And we got talking about this, and at the time I had just come back from a trip to New York, was visiting a friend on the Upper East Side. And I found this interesting kind of parallel. The people that lived 2 blocks from Central Park were miserable because they weren't on the park. And my friend was just so grateful to have this teeny tiny apartment that was several blocks from Central Park. So we did a study and looked, and lo and behold, that is true, that people that are just into a category and say, at least I'm here, are much happier than people that are objectively better off, but are comparing to people who are still better off than them. Same thing happened with cars. Okay, we looked at a Lexus. Who's happier, the person with the entry-level Lexus or the person with the mid-level Lexus? Well, the mid-level Lexus person wants the biggest, best Lexus. And the entry-level person says, wow, at least I have a Lexus. Okay, or whatever what would Jesus drive? Is that what you started? Fill in the brand. And so marketers have been really smart about saying, let's do more entry-level options for people. Let's make status and luxury affordable for many more people. So 2 thoughts I have kind of on how do we think about being happier with who we are as consumers. And the first one is the idea of how do you shift your reference points? And how do you really be selective in the reference you use for comparison? You might even say be strategic in making those comparisons. 2 social psychologists I like, Neil Rose and Shelley Taylor, both have done some great research in this area. Another process in there is called counterfactual thinking, where you compare your situation to what might have been or some foregone alternative. One that I love, though, something to do with consumers. Shelley Taylor did work with some colleagues on cancer patients. And what she found is that when people wanted to feel better about themselves, they could get compared downward to people that were cancer patients that were worse off than themselves. This 2 years ago, my dad was sick for a year, and it was amazing how often we did that. We compared to people who were worse off. And when you're in, ICU, you see a lot of people who are worse off, or in the burn unit. And it's amazing how comparing to people who are worse off helps us feel better. Okay? But what we also tend to do, and what the people in these cancer patients did, was they looked upward. But here they looked upward not to feel bad about themselves, to say, look at that cancer patient who is, doing so well. I wish I had that. But how did they get there? How did they get there? What did they do to be so successful in dealing with their disease? What we tend to do as a society is we look upwards to the Joneses, comparing to the Joneses, or the people we see on TV, or that reality TV that I'm not so sure is reality. And we look at all those things that they have and the lifestyle they have, but we don't think about how they got there. Okay? And most jobs, I think you write this in your book, people appear at work, they go to 1 or 2 meetings, and they go home. I watch private practice, I had to stop because I don't know how much time they actually spend treating more than 1 patient a week. But they spend a lot of time at home and other places. So some things to think about, what comparisons you make. If you make upward comparisons, it often leads to feelings of inadequacy. Okay? It makes you unhappy with your current state, and it leads people to make purchases that they can't afford. Okay? Thus the credit and mortgage crisis that we're in today. Be mindful, my other point there would be mindful of people who are worse off and be grateful for what you have. Okay? I don't think we take enough time to be happy for the glass half full, instead we look at the glass as half empty. One thing I do personally for this is I travel a lot outside the United States, and I would say outside the developed world. And you realize there are people that have so much less than we have. And I think, too, when I was teaching undergraduates, they'll talk about, I'm a starving student. And as a grad student, I said the same thing, and I was a starving student. But we're not really starving. We have clean drinking water, safe food, shelter where you're safe, and usually have air conditioning, so quite comfortable. We have cell phones, we have computers, we have TVs, we have video games. Okay? And this is an undergraduate. If you go around a dorm, you're going to see an awful lot of these things in the dorm rooms. We take these things for granted as they've gone from being wants to being needs. But as you rethink some of those things, realize that there are millions of people around the world who do not have the basics of clean water, ample food, safety. Okay? So take time to smell the flowers, appreciate what you've had, and realize that there are a lot of people that are worse off than where you are. The second thing, Jim's book did a nice job of talking about it. One of his techniques, if you want to make a major decision on a purchase, sleep on it. Don't just buy something because you think you absolutely need to have it. If you sleep on it, then you come back to it, you'll most likely have the resources, or you'll see it in a different perspective and say, yeah, I don't really need that thing. Well, my work on regret really looks at the opposite side. Instead of the prevention side, how do we learn from our mistakes? So that's the other thing I want to kind of hit as a point, is how do you learn from your mistakes? Jim mentioned a little bit about, your life goals and the deathbed test. There's a general trend that in later years, or in general, we regret our inactions in the long term. Okay, we regret our actions in the short term. I wish I hadn't done that. But we regret our inactions in the long term, those things we didn't do that we wished we'd done. I did some interesting research with another colleague and friend of mine, Kristen Deal, on souvenir purchase decisions. And we talked about it as, if you've ever been to Australia, the didgeridoo effect. People buy these long didgeridoos. There's instruments that take years to learn how to play. They're beautiful, but they're hard to carry home with you. And people buy them because they're in these limited situations where if I don't buy it now, I'll never be able to buy it again. Okay. My other example, and I've seen this in my studies and I've talked to people, they all shake their head. If you go to Hawaii, they have coral necklaces. They're indigenous to there, but people don't buy the coral necklaces because I can buy them at Macy's or any store. Okay. Instead, they buy these coral necklaces, which are branch coral, an endangered species. Is coral a species? Well, you get the idea. And they look like something that King Kamehameha's royal family would have worn, and nobody uses these things. So what we found there is that in some purchase situations, people regret their inactions in the short term. I wish I'd taken advantage of that sale. I wished I'd taken advantage of buying this didgeridoo on this trip. And it's that fear of that regret that makes them to buy stupid things. Okay, the coral necklace, the didgeridoo. When we talked to people later on about real souvenir purchases, it came back to, did it have some true reminder value and was it useful? So over my years of traveling, I've gotten much better at thinking through how do I evaluate a purchase and say, is this something that will be useful to me? Will it be a piece of art I hang on my wall? Is it something I'll actually wear? Think about the Hawaiian shirts or so many bad cultural clothes that are great when you're in that location, but you never wear them at home. I went to India and I have a closet full of Indian clothes that, unless I go back to India, I won't be wearing. So think a little bit on the preventative side about, do I really need this thing? Will I use it? Will I get home? Or am I just buying it because the opportunity is there and I don't want to lose the opportunity? Okay. If you've actually then gotten home and you have this thing that's bad, whether it's been a trip to IKEA or Best Buy or Target, or it's been a trip around the world, Lazarus and Folkman talk a lot about coping, and there's emotion-focused coping and problem-focused coping. On the problem-focused side, if you bought it at Best Buy, can you return it? Okay, I often leave tags on my clothing, and if it's been a month and I have not worn it, it gets returned. Okay, sell something on eBay or Amazon or a garage sale. Okay, don't just let things go to waste. Don't let them just go to the landfill. Although even there, I was thinking when I take clothes in to have them resold at a reseller, they're now looking and saying, well, Ann Taylor changed their color of their tag. This is so 4 seasons ago, and they won't take it. Okay, thrift stores are happy to take it. So the other thing is donate to thrift stores. They are funding really good causes. You can feel good about it, and you get a tax deduction. The other thing, though, I would say don't use the emotion focused of saying, let me rationalize this bad decision. The more we rationalize and justify our bad decision, the more it reinforces those things and leads us to make more bad decisions. Instead, I would ask you to rethink your decisions. So Jim mentioned reduce, reuse, recycle. We've heard that. But also rethink, what do I really need? How am I really going to use this? How is this going to add to my life? Okay? How is this going to affect my happiness or the happiness of others? You might need to adjust your goals and expectations a little bit along the way. But I think overall, if you think about how is this going to affect my happiness up front, you end up with more happiness later on. And I'm thinking I'm probably out of time, but I had literally pages of comments of things I wanted to say, and I'm sorry I couldn't share them all, but hopefully they'll come up in the questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm thinking of all the things I rationalized just this morning alone. I am now very pleased to ask Marc Belton forward. He is the Executive Vice President of Global Strategy, Growth and Marketing Innovation for General Mills. He'll be sharing really a practitioner's perspective. Mr. Belton received his economics degree from Dartmouth. He's also another Wharton alum, receiving his MBA from the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School of Business. Mr. Belton provides vision and leadership of General Mills' Global Strategy Department, future growth opportunities and global marketing functions, including GCOM, consumer insights, centralized customer marketing, and the company's strategic health and wellness initiatives. Mr. Belton is a member of the Executive Leadership Council in Washington, D.C., where I recently moved back from. He also has received numerous awards, including being named one of corporate America's most powerful African-American executives by Fortune and Black Enterprise. He also serves as a board member for U.S. Bancorp, Salvation Army, and Guthrie Theater. Mr. Belton.
Well, they had to get someone up here who was one of those terrible marketers, I guess, to spend some time and talk today. Ken, I want to thank you for the wonderful opportunity to be here today, as well as Ron James. I was excited about this because every time I get a chance to do things like this, it makes me better, all right? And what I've learned over the years is that we tend to teach others what we need the most. So, in all honesty, everything that I'm going to share with you, I'm actually first in line, for that information. But these things challenge me, and Your book was absolutely fantastic, James. And so if you guys you've heard his talk, there's so much more in this book than just that. And so what I would ask you to do is, hey, take a little of your extra disposable income, read the book. It's well worth reading. It really is well worth reading. And it added value to my life. And I'm rethinking some things as a result. I'm going to try to do three things. I'm going to give you one foundational view around the idea of shiny objects. I want to talk to you a little bit about the personal and the professional side of ethics as it relates to what we call marketing. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about marketing of the future, because a lot of this, I think, is actually in the midst of tremendous change right now in terms of the industry. We are at a Catholic and Christian institution, and it's hard for me to not start by saying, let's look at the Master's words. Jesus. Let's talk about what Jesus said about this subject, because honestly, what you shared is nothing new under the sun, right? It's all very true. And actually, Jesus talked about this more than 2,000 years ago. He said, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." All right, he told you more than a couple thousand years ago, beware of this stuff. Your life doesn't consist of it. Jesus talked about the rich man who had too much. And basically, he called him a fool, not because he was rich, but because he thought his life was in the abundance of what he had. And so what he said was, wow, what a fool. This night your soul will be required of you. And what will you actually do with those things that you are leaving? Who will take and inherit those things? Okay, so this is not new. Shiny objects can be idols. All right, and the first commandment in the Bible says you'll have no other God to worship. The second one says, do not make idols for yourself. And in many ways, this materialism that we talk about, that's what this is all about. And yet, it's a complex subject, because in Deuteronomy, God was very clear, and he said, I'm giving you, the nation of Israel, the ability to create wealth so that you can declare my name, so that you can declare who I am, right? Not so that you can have just more things, but that you can declare who I am. So first and foremost, we've got to think about a couple things. Number one, you've got to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And everything else is going to be given to you second. Secondly, you've got to be generous, to those in need. And, if you want to kill materialism on some level, think about generosity. And that'll put it on the altar for you. And I think you just need to put that in perspective. And I'm glad to get a chance in a Christian institution to actually share some of those things, because you can't always talk about it, but we can here, all right? And honestly, this is not unique. I lived in a clay hut in Africa in Sierra Leone in a village that made $1 a day, the average person. And I lived with 10 people in this incredibly small place. And I did not find them unhappy. Just didn't. Or maybe I felt sad for them because they didn't have a cell phone, and maybe they weren't able to watch HBO or whatever else is on there. But honestly, I didn't see a lot of sadness, because you know what? They found that their treasures in life were in community and in people, and in the things you do and in who you frankly are, not in the things that you actually own. And as I've gone on in life, I've done pretty well in life, so we've got some things that we own. And it's very clear to me that you do not get happy by having them. And for many people, having them actually is the burden in and of itself. So, if you live long enough, you'll actually figure some of this stuff out. And for the folks who are 20 years old, you're looking at me like the guy's out of his daggone mind. Keep going for it, okay? Keep trying. Keep going for it. Within a decade, you'll realize, all right, I guess that old bald-headed guy there probably was actually right, okay? So let's get on to the next issues. You raised the question of, does marketing create or does it meet consumer needs? The answer to that is actually yes, okay? It meets needs, and it can create demand. All right, but when you think about marketing, let's not be naive. When you're doing it, you're in the business of meeting consumers' needs, and you're trying to actually hope that you have the opportunity to earn someone's business by creating loyalty. That's what you're doing. You're in that business to try to earn their loyalty and earn their business. Okay, I love this quote by this guy named Wiseman. He said, "We do not sell products, consumers make purchases. And a purchase is an act of self-help in which An exchange is made. A product or a service is purchased, and what is given in return is a person's wages. That's what you do, in marketing, period. Occasionally we're lucky enough to create demand. Maybe the iPod is a great demand creator. I mean, they've done $3 billion in a very short period of time. Hadn't been designed before. It's created some quote-unquote demand. But by and large, if in most industries you're not creating demand, you're actually trying to take someone else's business from them and meet a consumer need. And that's really what it is. It's not rocket science. It's, I went to Wharton, I got an MBA there, but it's just not that deep. Okay? It's just not that deep. So the other thing I'll just say is, as you think about companies and places that you want to work, you ought to have a perspective on what that company's all about. Because, if you're going to work in marketing and business, you better try to work for a company that's highly ethical. And that's really important. So from a business standpoint, I would ask some questions. I'm thinking about these companies. Number one, does the product or the service make a positive contribution to the user? If the company you're going to work for, you can't honestly say it makes a positive contribution to the life of the user. I would argue, don't work there. All right, you're not adding any material value to their lives. Second question would be, does the offering of the product that you're trying to market, does it take advantage, manipulate, or try to, deceive the user? And there are stories. There are many of them. At General Mills, we have an annual marketing communication and ethics memorandum, which comes through my office. We do more than $1 billion worth of marketing, all right, in my group. We discipline what is done there, period. It's updated annually. Every person who works in marketing has got to read it, got to sign it. We have expectations for them about what they do and how they treat consumers, because our corporate mission is to nourish people's lives, to make their lives richer, to make them more healthy, to add value to the things that they do. So we have expectations, and we're very clear about them. If you're off the line, you're going to be out of the building. Third, does the organization have an established product and marketing set of guidelines? We have product guidelines. We won't advertise products if they don't meet a certain nutritional criteria. We just don't. Okay, and from a marketing standpoint, I've already told you about the guidelines there. So we are trying to be very disciplined because we know this is pretty tricky stuff. And you can get people in a lot of trouble and do things to people that you don't want. On a personal level, I would just ask yourself a couple questions too. Number one, does the product or the service, is that consistent with your personal ethics? Is it something you really can get excited about? For me, gambling, liquor, smoking, sexual content, there's a wide variety of things, as you call them, the sin businesses. I'm just not going to market. I get tons of great opportunities. People throw a fair amount of money at you because you've done this for a great company asking you to do things like that. Would you be willing to go work there? I'm not interested. Okay, I like the values of the things that we sell. I like being in a business like food because the truth is every day we need to eat food. All right, it is fundamentally essential to people's lives. All right, and we're a company that feeds the world. Okay, does it pass the sniff test, the stuff you do in marketing? If you won an award for marketing, the things that you do, would you be excited if your parents actually heard and understood what you actually did, what you were doing in that business? And is it possible to do good and do business at the same time? And I will say it absolutely is, but it takes work. Okay, it's easy to do the other stuff. It takes work to do the hard stuff. With my last couple comments, and we'll get to questions, I'm going to tell you right now that in many ways, a lot of what we've discussed today, I think is going to be trying to fix old problems, because honestly, marketing is changing. It's under a profound transformation. Marketing is being democratized. It's being fueled by technology, and for the opportunity for convergence between society and brands is operating in a way it never could operate before. People and brands are sharing ownership even today. We're trying to get people to own and share our brands. We're sharing content and context with one another. No one's as smart as everyone. No one gets tricked in this new world. Look at the liking ratings. There's nothing you need to buy today without go and check the liking ratings on it. Find out what people say. It's being democratized. You know, the idea of the old snake salesman, you're selling something, I mean, come on, that's all gone. You know, there's too much connectivity, and technology is enabling a level of transparency and authenticity that's necessary. I think in the future, communities and affinity groups are what's going to rule the way marketing goes forward. And brand advocacy is central to the future of marketing, all right? And having people become advocates for your brand versus you trying to push a story to them just through the amount of money that you spend. So what that's going to require is a new contract. And that new contract is going to see your business has to have a meaningful mission or a meaningful purpose for why it is being purchased by the consumer. You're going to have fundamental utility for your product and your service. You're going to have to share ownership and accountability for the things you do. I can't tell you, man, how much stuff we hear from people now that we never would have heard from before because they are active and engaged in the things that we do. They hold us accountable. It makes us better. You're going to have a higher level of speed and agility doing this business than you ever had before. And you better have a whole lot of wisdom. And that kind of wisdom is going to be saying the wisdom of many is going to be greater than the wisdom of one. So with that, I'd love to just turn it over, say thank you guys very much, and thank you for the challenge and the privilege of this today.
Well, thank you, Marc, very much. I, for one, can say I have really enjoyed our first part of the evening. Some very provocative comments, some nourishing ones, and I'm looking forward to hearing the dialogue that will ensue. What we will do right now is take a break, about 15 minutes, and that 15-minute break, you'll be able to converse outside. We will be picking up cards with questions, and I think, Jill, there are some cards that are out there. We will then be looking during the next 15 minutes as a team here to pull out some pithy comments that we will be listening to the panelists respond, and I think move us to the next part of this conversation. So please take the next 15 minutes, and we'll see you back here.
Oh, there's cookies outside on the table, just outside to the right. I didn't know what flavor you would have liked. I would have gotten one for everybody. It's because there's so much butter and other stuff in them, I'm sure.
You need the softball.
I saw the question.
Did you see that my sister-in-law had that connection with you? What a small world.
And then your niece and my nephew were married once in a Barbie tent.
Oh, Sylvia's wonderful. She's a wonderful girl.
So we could be family one
And
day.
my daughters, who you saw up there, were much older than that, are Sylvia's best friends. They're just, the texting and all that kind of stuff. And they were so mad at me. I had given my daughter, because they had to go to school. So I had 13 and 15. So one's driving and just starting a date. And the other one, but I told her, and yeah, it's easy to be here. But I told my daughter, I said, whether you're working or not, you'll come with me and be my secretary. And she goes, oh, but I said, you got to get your approval on your mom. She went over, of course, mom shot that one out. So I'm by myself.
She's taking it right here.
Hope it's not a hard one.
You get a good cookie?
Yeah, that's what was going on that day.
I've pretty much had all of them over the years of eating.
Oh,
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, yeah, we've got
Such a great
third
school.
and maybe a quarter of
Oh, that's great. Great.
such a great school. They got the right values here.
I am so, when you think about all the things of finding a company,
Okay, we'll start in about 10 seconds here. Let's see who's coming. These questions are excellent, so I will throw out a few, and as I throw them out, the panelists can chime in as you will. Some of them are for specific individuals. I think this is a great one. In the book, page 206 and 211, Dr. Roberts, you talk about marketers. What do they know that we don't know about our insecurities?
That is a good question. Marc?
And along that same line, yes, Marc.
I've got it.
You've got it. Marc, what do you know about me? But secondly, Marc, what would you do if you had to cut your marketing budget in half?
Well, Let me try to handle that first one. I've done a lot of research in the area of compulsive buying, but if you look at the type of advertising appeals we do, we know that a large percentage of our decisions we make about what we spend is based upon insecurities, right? Do I look good? Do I drive a nice enough car? Do I have bad breath? Do I have body odor? And things like that. And we've learned from studying compulsive buyers that largely compulsive shopping, and so you have to look at compulsive buying on a continuum. There are those that are clinically diagnosed as compulsive buyers who have, serious problems that need to be addressed professionally, but the rest of us fall somewhere along that spectrum. So we're really all compulsive buyers. Beyond the very basics of food, shelter, and clothing, everything, as I mentioned in my talk today, is discretionary spending. So we're all, to one degree or another, a compulsive buying. And what we found by studying both the clinically diagnosed compulsive buyers and everybody who kind of falls along the continuum, that one of the main reasons why we purchase is to assuage, to mood repair, to assuage these insecurities that we have about who we are and what our place is in this world.
Mark?
We're not nearly as sinister as it may sound. We're not. We don't have any. We're not out trying to do real psychological studies on your insecurities as we do the stuff that we do. Honestly, we do want to know you as well as we possibly can so that we can meet your needs. But we're not. We're not sitting there, going, oh, if we say this, this will catch on to this person's weakness and it'll make them buy our products or anything like that. I mean, I wish that we were that good, but we're really not. Honestly, we have great products that we believe in. We know that they provide a fundamental service or benefit, and we're in the business of trying to make you aware of those products and then trying to build loyalty with you by fulfilling the needs you have. And it's just that simple. It's not that deep. It just isn't that deep. So, but it's our job to know you as well as you know yourself. I mean, that is our job. So we spend a fair amount trying to make sure we understand people, but we're not in there doing any Freudian stuff.
And I always like to think about, because there's that myth about subliminal advertising, right? We've all kind of known, we've talked about that as marketers and academicians, but I don't think the general public has found it. We largely debunked that idea that we can get people to do things by sending subconscious messages through the, scrawlings on people's faces. On Time Magazine, Gaddafi, we did that, and, the word sex and Ritz crackers and things will get us to buy more Ritz crackers. But my favorite little short story about that was when I'd asked a question about, the efficacy of subliminal advertising to my students, and one said, well, subliminal advertising is appealing to the person at the unconscious level. All right, so she tried, but that was...
And I think, I'm going to add one other thing, I think the other spot where you maybe do see some of this is that we're trying to, in a world with so many brands, we're trying to have brands that match different personalities of people. So more than trying to trick you with the product, we're going to take the same beer and put different spins on what that personality is to try to tap into different people's insecurities and needs.
I think that's a great point. The question came up a few times about the financial crisis during the past few years. How would you say the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008 impacted consumer behavior?
I'll take that one. That's a kitten ball. What we hoped, and what I've been asked at least 100 times, is will we learn our lesson, with this great recession of 2008? And clearly my simplest response to that is we never have before. We've had these kind of recessions, maybe not as extreme as the Great Recession of 2007-8, but we haven't learned our lesson. And the proof in the pudding was that what happened as we entered in this very severe recession, where Warren Buffett said that this was the nearest to total collapse of our economic system that we ever came, and more so than even the Depression, was what we saw is people batten down the hatches. They started to save money. We saw personal savings rate climb. I'm using that word, climb to 5 to 6%. What's happened? The clouds have kind of left somewhat the economic horizon, and we've already dropped down to those personal savings rates of 2 to 3%. We've already built up our credit cards back to where they were pre-recession. So my simple answer to that is we suffer as Americans, we suffer from short-term consumer amnesia.
Yeah, one of the things that's very clear to us, in the food business is that people's disposable income has fundamentally changed. And because of disposable income has changed, their behaviors have changed as well. If you go to folks at Walmart, they'll tell you right now, sirloin steak is not being bought. Okay, people are buying hamburger. People have made fundamental changes in their purchasing behavior and their patterns. They're eating out less. The savings numbers they have changed a bit, but people are fundamentally their mindset. They've been affected. This is a profound effect. And the way that they're spending money as it relates to food and those types of products, they're very different. And we actually don't expect them to change in the very near term. You know, we expect a couple points maybe in out-of-home eating, you know, to kind of, you know, ease up a little bit, give people a break. But I'm telling you, value that's 1A, 1B, and 1C, you know, and people are very discriminating. And when you only have $50 in your wallet to go buy food for that week, you know, your mindset is very different than it was a long time ago. So, you know, our view is that it has changed, and we've seen it change as it relates to our products, you know, and our ability to sell them.
And I think, too, the other thing you see is it's hitting everybody. So there's also, even if you have plenty, there is a sense of, I don't want to show that I have plenty. Right. So even the luxury good manufacturers were hit by this and saying, and people were shifting the types of purses or luxury symbols that they bought. But I think, I talk to my students, if you're losing students to people going to a lower level product, there are people at a higher level, that were buying a higher level product, that are switching to yours. So for example, a rotisserie chicken. You know, $5 cluck on Fridays at Lunds if you go. Anyone go to that? Okay.
Word of mouth.
But people that maybe were eating out on a Friday night are now picking up a $5 cluck, and someone that might have been picking up a rotisserie chicken are now getting a chicken and baking it themselves, and other people that maybe were baking it themselves are now getting a little bit of canned chicken and spreading it out. And my mom used to call it meatball surprise. Yell surprise when you find a meatball.
You know, you look at restaurant trends, the only restaurant segment that's growing is QSR, quick serve restaurants. And it's, the only reason why it's growing is because people have had to move down. They still want to go out. They just can't go out and spend $50, right? So, you know, people are adapting. We are incredibly resilient, as you said in your earlier quote. People are resilient and they are making changes. And that's to the credit of the American spirit. People are making those changes and finding ways to still maintain, you know, a level of family and maybe some intimacy that maybe they had lost a while ago, they're actually bringing back.
Well, how was, this question kind of coming this way, how has General Mills responded to that? Because I know the real challenge for you then would be private labels and things like that at grocery stores. How have you responded to that?
Yeah, no, it's been much more difficult in the last few years, being effective, you know, with what we're doing on the marketing side, because it has affected us because it's affected our consumers. 52% of all Americans are making less than $50,000 for their household. You know, that changes, you know, companies like our profile, you know, and so we've had to be much more value conscious, you know, not necessarily discount conscious, but providing higher levels of value in the stuff that we sell. I mean, it's absolutely critical right now. Private labels are growing, you know, store brands are growing, and the quality is quite high, so we have to get better. We've got to add more into our products. We've got to make them remarkable. They can't just be good enough with a great brand. They have to be remarkable now, so we're working hard on that.
Great. This is more of an economy question, but should economists continue to represent growth as a legitimate goal, or does the assumption that growth is good undermine our collective happiness? Along that same lines, you all have experienced international travel and seeing countries that don't experience happiness in the same way, or perhaps the actual measurement of. Do you find that countries such as Nepal or Bhutan, Lisa and I were talking about, their output on a happiness index as opposed to GDP have the same pursuit for happiness through material things? So economists, the view of growth as a legitimate goal, and the idea of these countries that are perhaps more third world and that are using a happiness index.
Maybe Marc could speak better to the second question than me, but what I've found is, my favorite quote, Edward Abbey had said this, he said, growth for the sake of growth is the philosophy of the cancer cell. And I think that holds true to our behavior as consumers as well. And I was on NPR, I was asked that same question, or the difficult question inevitably will come up here, is, well, what happens to our economy if people start to spend less? You know, and so isn't it our patriotic duty? We've been told that by each president, each successive president, that is our patriotic duty to prime the pump and keep the economy going. So that's a good argument, but the comment that was made there was, you know, we got to spend to keep the economy going, and I likened it to a mother lion eating her cubs to survive. The growth is going to have to come from someplace other than American consumers. We just can't support the kind of spending and the kind of debt that we now have, and if growth doesn't come from exports, we're just going to see us making the same mistake in very few short years.
Interesting.
I'll talk about Bhutan. I think that as a country is fascinating. They've only allowed tourists into the country, I think, in the last 20 years. They've been maintained very closed in this idea of the role of TV and media. Mm-hmm. They are very close to outside influences coming in and changing people's perceptions of what you need for happiness. And you find that people with a lot less are very happy people. Okay, it's only when you become aware of these things you don't have that you suddenly go, oh, yeah, if only I had that. So I think some of what Bhutan is doing is smart. How long they can maintain that, I don't know. You know, China keeps trying to say we want to keep out certain influences through the web, and the web makes it really hard to keep things out. So we'll see.
It may be too late for China. I was sharing this with my family, that my book is now going to be published in Chinese. And so, maybe I'm actually thinking, my thought was that was a great market. I wish we could have started with that market, because I still think we have a large vestige of the Chinese population that would agree with the sentiments that I'm sharing about, careful stewardship of our money and, only spending when we have to and things like that. So we'll see how that goes. But
and about 10 years ago, I heard a study that they were in very, very rural parts of China, and they did not have the word for brand. They simply had flour and sugar and rice, and they didn't have brands of them. So it's different, and it's changing very, very, very rapidly.
Well, what is a brand? A brand is a representation of trust, a service or a service. I mean, that's what it is, right? I mean, there are names. Google, nobody knew what that was, right? But it had a tremendous value, right? It provided an incredible service, so people began to remember the brand. All right, that's all it is. I think we overcook this stuff. It's just, again, it's not that deep. All right, and if you have a good brand, you are providing a tremendous service that provides utility to people on some level. And and you can damage a brand by breaking trust with your consumers, because a brand is a trust mark. That's all it is. And brands are being created all the time, and brands are dying all the time, depending on their level of utility, the level of trust that they have, what they're doing, what they provide for people. And so, don't make these things bigger than they are. There's a graveyard of brands. We got a ton of them at General Mills, that are dead, and there's some that are dying, and then there are others that are growing, and the ones that grow are reflective of adding value to people's lives, and the ones that don't, they're not. I guess I wouldn't just get too stoked up about, what a brand is. A brand is a mark. It's a mark of trust. It's a mark of some level of quality, benefit, or service that people really like.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, but brands can become so enmeshed in people's lives. So I'm thinking about, like you said, Apple, and I think about, how that's become, it's not just the instrumental benefits of the product, but just that the brand says so much about who you are, and people get so involved in it. I was thinking about a Consumer Gone Wild vignette in my book about a gentleman who has 69 different Mickey Mouse tattoos on his body, and then all these Mickey Mouse, I think he was collecting Mickey Mouse cookie containers. And so sometimes these brands, I'm not sure that's typical of, most Disney. I know some Disney fanatics.
I would say he's crazy. Okay. 69 Mickey Mouses on your body.
I just report him as I see it.
I know, but I'm just saying. He's crazy.
But it is.
And
It's
he's
just
not that deep. He's not that deep.
I just say he's crazy. Hey, facing Apple, they have gone from a company that was on death's bed X number of years ago to a company that now the stock is $632. It's one of the highest market caps in the world. They are doing something right. It isn't their advertising. Okay, it's not their advertising. They are offering things, and they are creating demand, with products that provide a benefit to people, whether we value those benefits or not. We don't like people texting or whatever your vibe is. The bottom line is they are providing real benefits to people. And, I spent a day at Apple, top to top with their top leaders. I came home and I was like, I just went and bought more stock, because it was quite evident to me that these guys have a plan. They know what they're doing. They are providing a value, a service, a benefit to consumers that's meaningful, and they are resonating. And not just here in the U.S., all around the globe. And there are places that aren't doing that. Dell computers, they used to be great. But then you hear people today, they're saying down with Dell, right? Because the brand isn't the same, because they lost the trust. The quality isn't the same. The customer service is not the same. The delivery and the benefit isn't the same. Oh, by the way, they missed the whole entertainment connectivity with people thing all along the way while they were just trying to create faster computers, which had no value to people because most folks really don't use computers for high technology stuff, right? So I don't know. I mean, I just think we just got to get honest on some of this stuff.
And it was very
Just gotta get
interesting that we
honest.
talked about Apple. I had written a blog just recently, and people are in love with Apple. They love their iPhones, their iPads, their iPods, and things like that. But what my students didn't know, and made dear to them, or conveyed to them, is that in China, they're going through some big controversies now where they're paying, $3 to $5. People are living in dormitories and working 18 hours a week. They're discouraged from, leaving and things like that. And so, even in a consumer success story like Apple, we don't always hear, the whole story. And the whole story is that they need, and then people argue back and forth about what's the standard of living in China, and maybe $5 a day is, but they were literally, and this is just because I think this is interesting, and, I'm not as much an Apple fan as a lot of people, but they literally had put nets around the building that they made the iPods in because people were jumping. They had a rash of 5 suicides from being overworked, supposedly. So they put a net to catch people from hitting the ground at the iPod, at this factory that made iPods for Apple.
I'm not an Apple representative. I can't. I don't know that's true. No, it may be true. I can't really speak of it.
Exactly,
But I'm just
exactly.
saying, when you look at the fundamental utility and what they've done to transform that industry,
incredible.
relative to all the other players who are out there doing Mickey Mouse Me Too products that are absolutely the same and built on features instead of fundamental benefits and changing the way people live and use things, you just got to give it to them.
We are running out of time, but you have all alluded to the role of the consumer. So I'm going to close with this question. One of your recommendations, Dr. Roberts, is on being a better consumer and being a socially responsible consumer in terms of our behaviors. How do we do this without companies taking advantage of this? Take the Green Revolution, for example.
Yeah, that is difficult, and I'm sure Marc could speak to that as well about all the confusing array of different environmental claims, and you would have to work your way through it. I did my PhD in that area, and I'm confused, by what's the best kind of products to buy that way. But I think there are a lot of shopping guides that are available that will tell us that kind of the record, both as far as charitable records and the different kind of records they have on hiring minorities or women into the boardroom, recycling and things like that. So you really have to do your homework because companies aren't, some of them a lot of them are putting it out there, but we really can't take that at face value. We really have to do our own research and make careful decisions based on that research.
Well, I want to thank the three of you. Lisa, do you have any final comments?
Well, I was actually, when I talked to Michelle earlier, my biggest comment was kind of tacking on what you said, is that with technology and communication, that we as consumers are holding companies accountable so much more for their actions. And if you screw up, if you kind of try to bend the rules or skip ethics or green or whatever the issue is, consumers will find out, and they will be very vocal about it, and the backlash will be worse.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think over time, it's like any new thing. People are learning over time, if I use banner ads inappropriately, people will learn to ignore them. Yes. So we've now gotten smarter about banner ads, display ads. I think we're going to keep learning from mistakes in the world of social media and saying, we can't do these things because customers are going to find out and they're going to publicize it and we're going to be worse off as a result.
Yeah, the democratization of what's happening in this industry is profound. It's transformative. It is transformative. And the truth is, the power is quietly moving from the producers and the manufacturers and the retailers to who? The consumer, you. Okay, you have a lot of control. Your communication, your voice, what you do, holding people accountable. You have a tremendous amount of control. And that's good because it really makes us better. People can look at this and say it's a tremendous nuisance to have all these people writing and holding us. You know what? It makes us better. And I think it's going to help us make a better society also. Because, we need to be challenged to move to the highest and best, to the godliness that's there. We can't say that in corporate places, but the truth of the matter is, as the wisdom of crowds continue to push for higher and better, it's going to move us closer to the light than where we are currently right now. So, don't give your power away, during this period because it's transformative.
Thank you very much. I have a small token from the coach chair to thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle.
Shiny.
It's shiny, yes, exactly.
You marketer, you. I was going to say, as you can see, there's shiny objects inside also. Dr. Roberts, in his book, quotes Rabbi Harold Kushner, as will I. Kushner says, "Our souls hunger for meaning, for the sense that we have figured out how to live so that our lives matter, so that the world will be at least a little bit different for our having passed through it." I want to thank you to our panel and to those of you that have been involved in this evening's discussion. I think we may all be a little bit different from this dialogue, so I want to thank you.